right now, who's pushing Granny over the cliff? You saw this ad that I believe it was the DNC put out back, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago that showed Granny being pushed off the cliff by somebody who kind of looked from the back like Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan joked that he had to do 7 takes to get the ad right. Of course, it was a joke. But Dr. Jane Orient is with us, the executive director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. AAPSonline.org is their website. And Jane is also the author of Your Doctor Is Not In, Healthy Skepticism About National Health Care. Dr. Orient, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning.
Good morning. I read your piece, Who's Pushing Granny Over the Cliff? And I'm pretty astounded by a few of these things. You say that the Social Security Trust Fund contains nothing but IOUs. Yes,
that's right. The government spends the money the instant it comes in. There is no lockbox whatsoever. There is just some sort of thing in there that's a budget authority that the government can use to authorize spending, but there's no actual money in there. The government has to get that money from current taxes or else from borrowing. And as you may know, the government is now borrowing 40% of everything that it spends.
You understand that when George Bush was born, his several $million trust fund that he was born with was all in Treasury bills. Do you think that he was born with no wealth at all, that he was just born with IOUs? Because that's what the Social Security Trust Fund is invested in, is Treasury bills.
No, the Social Security Trust Fund is not invested in marketable securities. It stopped investing in those decades ago. It's invested in a very special kind of intergovernmental debt.
Yes, it is, but they're Treasury bills. They're not. You're right. They're not saleable on an open market. But the government does have to redeem them, just like with any other Treasury bill. There are dozens of different kinds of Treasury bills and bonds that the government issues. This is just one of many, but it is as redeemable as the debt that George Bush was born with.
Yeah, but what does it redeem it with? It redeems it with
cash.
Revenues. Tax revenues. Where does it get the cash? From tax revenues and from borrowing from the Chinese and the Saudis and Americans and anybody else with money.
Of course. And I mean, that's where the government's getting the money right now to fight the war in Iraq. That's where we're getting the money to fight the war in Afghanistan. That's where we're getting the money to pave the roads. I mean, of course, governments get their money from tax revenues. What's evil about that?
Well, people sort of assumed that they already paid the taxes, but they didn't. These bonds, special budget authority things, are going to be redeemed by their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren paying current taxes.
But would you rather Social Security, when they generated a $2.6 trillion surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund, would you rather, instead of that money being put into government treasuries, that it be put into the stock market?
Well, I would rather it not be put into aircraft carriers, bridges to nowhere, welfare benefits.
So where should it have gone? Where should the Social Security Administration have invested their $2.6 trillion surplus?
I think they used to invest it in marketable securities that could be sold in the open market, and rather than just redeemed by another agency of the government using tax dollars.
Well, no, actually they didn't. These kinds of securities came along in 1983 with the creation of the Social Security Trust Fund, where when Reagan doubled the Social Security tax so that one generation, the baby boomers, would pay both for their parents' retirement and for their own, and their own retirement would be in a savings account called the Social Security Trust Fund. Prior to that, Social Security was entirely pay-go. All the money coming in from current retirees paid for people who were retired.
Correct, but it still is a Ponzi scheme that all of the money that is going out once the pay-go is exceeded, which I think it already is, comes from people who are pumping gas, people who are flipping burgers. Everybody who's working is forking over money to an elderly retired person who thinks that he paid for it himself, but his money has already been spent.
Well, if it would be a Ponzi scheme if there was a Charles Ponzi, if there was somebody skimming money off the top, if there was a Bernie Madoff putting $50 billion in his pocket. But
the U.S. Congress that was putting money into all of this other stuff.
Who is the Ponzi here? Who is profiting from Social Security?
Well, the government did not have to raise taxes to cover all of its spending because it was taking money out of the Social Security taxes and using it for general revenue purposes.
Well, no, that money was borrowed.
It was borrowed from the upcoming generation, and that's called taxation without representation.
I'm really confused. Social Security has a $2.6 trillion surplus. They decide to invest that money, and rather than putting it in the stock market or keeping it in a checking account with Chase Manhattan that pays no interest, they buy treasury bonds from the government that pay 2-3% interest. That seems like a rational thing for the Social Security Administration to do. And as long as our government is running a debt, which it has done since the George Washington administration, every government on earth runs a debt. In fact, a number of economists argue that it's necessary for governments to run debt in order to fund certain types of things that people want to be able to invest in a secure investment. That's the debt of the government. Why would you not want Social Security to invest their money in Treasury bills? And how does that make anything? How does that make it a Ponzi scheme? And how does that make this just makes no sense to me. These assertions you're making.
Well, the government used the money to buy aircraft carriers and other things, and it did not raise taxes enough to cover that. It uses Social Security revenues, and it is counting on future Social Security revenues or other taxes.
No, not future Social Security revenue, for future taxes. You're right.
And they're going to be paid by people who are now working.
So you're arguing that our government should not issue any Treasury bonds?
I'm saying that our government is $2.3 trillion more in debt than it acknowledges because all of the debt in the Social Security so-called trust fund has to be redeemed from incoming tax revenues or from
I agree with you on that. That's how Ronald Reagan set it up. And that allowed him to run up a $2 trillion deficit or add $2 trillion to the national debt. Actually, the official amount that he added was $2 trillion. And in reality, he probably added about $3 trillion because of this, because Social Security was offline. But it's still, Social Security is still fine. It's solvent. It's got $2.6 trillion. If we did away with the cap, it would be fine forever. I don't understand your objection to it unless you think that there shouldn't be Social Security. If you agree with Rick Santorum that it should just be privatized. Is that the agenda here?
Well, I think that what we've done is we've made America's retiring seniors dependent on a government fund that is based on an intergenerational forced transfer of wealth, because all of the money to be paid out to today's retirees has to come from 2.2, soon it'll be 2.2 working people.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, we don't have enough money. There's not enough money in the world to pay all of it, so the government is going to default either by debauching the currency.
In the world?
Yeah, that's right. The unfunded liabilities of the government are, something like $75 trillion.
Okay, Dr. Jane Orient, aapsonline.org. You can read all about it. Doctor, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, if that made any sense to you, maybe you can explain it to me.